shocking images coming out of Khan Yunis in Gaza, as armed and masked Hamas and Islamic Jihad gunmen handed over 2 civilian Israeli hostages to the Red Cross, Arbel Yehuda and Gadi Moses, as you can see here, amid crowds of chaos, cries and cameras. Arbel visibly scared as a mob of thousands of cheering Palestinians, many armed and masked, pushed and shoved, many touching her. What do you think, Dan, about what message it's sending to the Gazans, but also to the Israelis about how much of a stronghold Hamas still has there and how much support they have among the people?
It's clear that Hamas's main messaging is that they remain in charge in Gaza, and it's not just a question of the day after, although certainly that's part of it, but also the revisionist narrative of the war. They're going to say that because Israel meant to dislodge them and they have not been dislodged, they won the war. It's hard for a certain mindset to look at the devastation in Gaza, at the absolute ruination, at the loss of life, the horror that the Palestinians went through, and think this is somehow a victory. But I fear that among certain Palestinians, it will indeed be received that way if Hamas can credibly claim that, look, we went through this 16-month thing and we emerge in place.
We're still here.
We're not just still here. We won the war. That's going to be their story.
Right.
Now, today's event in Khan Yunis, I mean, it certainly seems disgusting and disgraceful. Is it because that's what Islamic Jihad wanted to show? Is it because it seemed partly orchestrated? Was it orchestrated by Hamas somehow in order to show that we are more orderly than Jihad? I really don't know. It was cruel and inhuman.
There were almost as many cameras as there were guns. So it was absolutely meant to be visualized and sent out to the world. The question is...
There's a certain narrative that I hear in Israeli reporting that says, oh, it's chaotic and out of control, maybe to a degree, but I didn't see that. I saw an orchestrated mob scene with a few thousand people, no more. And I have to say, in the whatever benefit that might have in Palestinian public opinion, in Israel, it is very bad because it is perceived as a crowd of Gazans who hate the hostages and wanted to rip them limb from limb. And there's a certain narrative in Israel that says there's no innocent people in Gaza. And it was so unfair because what we saw today is a few thousand people, not 2 million. But that's the narrative that's being set in because of this.
And this highlights that.
So narrative. I mean, it's just very unfortunate. Also, obviously, on a human level, for the poor hostages, for Arbel Yehuda in particular. I mean, she was obviously terrified. And
yeah, it's very emotional images.
Something bigger is knocking on our doors. So there's no option from the Trump administration that this ceasefire deal with the 3 phases will not move ahead. And I don't see Israel getting back to the war in Gaza.
Really?
Yes, that's how I see it.
Interesting.
We don't have to agree.
No, I'm
just saying, because
I
think
agreeing
that...
or disagreeing, it's just interesting to hear because we have been covering this for a while and there has been so much skepticism. Even Donald Trump himself has said he's not confident that it's going to make it that far. Do you think that it is likely or possible that the same prime minister that led Israel through this war in Gaza is going to be the same prime minister that can take us to peace?
yes, I think the only thing driving Netanyahu is what keeps him in power. So he'll go right, he'll go left, he'll go up, and he'll go down. Right now, in the past couple of years, what's been keeping him in power is the coalition of parties from the right, the center-right, and the various religious factions that he's formed into a rock-solid bloc. And that coalition threatens to bring him down unless he resumes the war. So that's the reality right now. Given the way things are right now, if you look at this deal, if you read the deal basically is the terms that Hamas has been demanding for over a year, which are that they will return all the hostages in 2 phases, 3 phases, whatever, in exchange for an end to the war and a full Israeli pullout. Israel has agreed to this. It hasn't agreed to all the modalities about exactly how to do the second and third stage, but those are minor things. Israel has agreed to the principle that it pulls out. Now, if it pulls out, today, Hamas remains in power in Gaza. And this is a major abdication of one of its 2 or 3 war aims, and it'll be horrifying for the Israeli public, even though they agree to it because there's nothing else, and it'll be potentially devastating to Netanyahu's coalition. So as things stand, either Netanyahu finds a way to scuttle the deal by inventing an impossibility, an impasse in negotiations with Hamas on how many prisoners are released or whatever, and thus saves his government and resumes the war. And I agree with Grisha that that's doesn't seem really possible, but that's where things do appear to be headed. Or they go through the deal, as Trump clearly would like them to do, and then Hamas declares victory by still being basically the sovereign in Gaza, and then perhaps the government falls. Now, none of this is even remotely acceptable, certainly not to the prime minister, because it looks like it would bring him down. So I think Netanyahu might be strangely receptive to precisely what has been suggested here. Something else that reorganizes everything.
Something else.
The easy thing would be a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia.
More than that.
Hold on. The difficult thing for Netanyahu's coalition is to find a way to create a day-after narrative that does not exist in the current deal,
right,
that would either force or compel or ease the way for Hamas to subtly, quietly step down. That can only go in one way or another through the brand, the very, very badly battered brand, the rightly disgraced brand called the Palestinian Authority. I think they're going to have to bite the bullet, restore the Palestinian Authority to Gaza, say it's going to be different, it's going to be rejuvenated, it's going to have a maybe different leadership. Mahmoud Abbas might step down, the Qataris and maybe the Saudis will have a very, very major role. I suspect if Israel agrees to this, all these Arab parties are going to condition every last dollar and dinar on Hamas finding a way to step down. It won't be easy because we saw today the lengths they'll go to create this victory narrative for themselves. It won't be easy at all.
And one thing is them stepping down officially. The other thing is the ideology, the support that they
that ideology.
Have among the Palestinian
they have
people,
ways,
especially in Gaza, but also in the West Bank.
They have ways of maintaining that ideology without being fully in power. But I suspect a rounding of corners and some delicate way out combined with blunt brute force from the US, some of the Europeans, and the Gulfi Arabs.
Hamas will not be in Gaza officially. We will see technocrats in Gaza led by the PA, and Hamas will be in the back. On the other hand, Hamas, with the narrative of victory, they will lead a civil war in the West Bank. Mm-hmm. And this is what is happening in the West Bank. And this process started in May 2021, after the fourth round of escalation with Israel, between Israel and Hamas. This is when actually this ring of fire led by Iran started, and Hamas dedicated to the goal of winning the elections the day after Abbas will lead a civil war in Gaza, knowing that as a temporary situation, they will give up on the official, I would say, the official responsibility in Gaza.
Look, there's no evidence yet that they will. Predicting what nihilistic jihadis will do is always a risk, Grisha. But it does make sense, for sure. I'll point out the most recent poll I saw from Shkaki, which was September, but which had tracked public opinion in the West Bank and Gaza throughout the war, showed support for the decision by Hamas to start a war that they cannot win, constantly diminishing, and by September reaching a 39% level in Gaza versus 57% who said it was a mistake. Now, there's a myth in Israel that 80% of all Palestinians still support this. Depending on how you ask the question, maybe you can come to that result. But when asked, was it a good or bad idea to attack Israel, 57 to 39% of Gazans said no. In the West Bank, support remained much, much, much higher because, of course, they didn't suffer the consequences. But also the Palestinians, when they're asked this question, they're trying to deliver a message. And the Palestinians in the West Bank are frustrated with the PA, that still governs them in West Bank, with Israel's never-ending shenanigans, the military control of areas B and C, and so on. What the truth really is and who they really would support in an election, I think depends on who the candidates are. Right now, support for the PA is much suppressed by the stupendous unpopularity of Mahmoud Abbas, who's been around for 20 years, who has no popular mandate, who's seen as being corrupt and over the hill and just wrong in every way. Depending on what comes after, that could change very, very dramatically. When asked, who would you vote for? In the same poll I cite, 35 to 40% said Hamas. That's bad, terrible, depressing, given the cataclysm they've brought upon the Palestinians. not majority support yet. It's roughly what they got in 2006 when there was this myth that they won the election and that's why they governed Gaza in 2006. They did not. They got plurality, not majority support, because Fatah had split. And that seems to be more or less what you still have today. Much depends on what happens. And the interesting name is Marwan Barghouti. If they manage to spring him from jail in a second, third phase, or somehow subsequently, and he owes something to Hamas, he could end up being some sort of compromise candidate that's almost a deus ex machina.
I want to bring you in here now, Balir, because we've had this narrative from Benjamin Netanyahu and those going against a deal for a long time, saying that it's been of no use to talk about a future in Gaza after the war until Hamas is defeated, because the population would be afraid to go against Hamas. The population would have a difficult time seeing an alternative. And now we're at the point where something has to happen. If there's not an alternative, Hamas is clearly still standing and still has support.
Hamas is still in power until Hamas is actually degraded and dismantled entirely. No one can be an alternative. You can't put an alternative at any point, in my view at least. And to your point, I think that the Shkaki polling is great, fantastic, but we're looking at it from the Israeli point of view. They are looking at it also from the Palestinian, internal Palestinian point of view. Inside the Palestinian territories and the Palestinian population, they also think that Fatah, for example, is corrupt, and Hamas has vowed not to be corrupt, and they turned out to be corrupt. So it's not only about the struggle with Israel.
Oh, I said things are shifting all the time.
Yes, but it's not only about the struggle with Israel as we see it. So that also needs to be taken into consideration.
I'm going to have to cut you off now because we're simply running out of time. I know there's so much more to discuss. Grisha Yakubovic, Balir Sladin, and Dan Perry, thank you all so much for joining us and bringing in your analysis and your knowledge. That's all for this special edition on the release and return of the hostages from captivity in Gaza to safe ground in Israel.